Hi, online people. Will be just a few more minutes.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Do I need to test up there? Peter Piper, I'm good? Okay, thank you. Well, what am I going to need? Let me get the rest of this stuff. Sorry, I'm a little behind here. Okay. Welcome, everyone. So our little sheet here for confirmation reception is up here. There are 2 folks getting baptized. Yay. So that's very exciting. So that'll happen on Easter morning. Let me make sure you're both talking about 10 o'clock. Is that okay that we do it at the 10 o'clock service? Yes? Okay. And Colin, do you have a middle name or anything? I need to put you, so when we actually do the baptism, I need to use your full name, and we need to put that in the book, so if you can add that. Yeah, you can just stick it right in there. Yep. Just arrow it in there, that's fine, okay? All right. So, those of you who are considering being received and confirmed, if you can get on that sheet today, that would be really helpful, because I'll need to start putting that service together, well, next week, but I'll have to do Easter tomorrow. So, okay? All right, sounds good. All right, anything left over from previous classes that woke somebody up at 3 in the morning and they said, oh, I need to know about this? No, we're good? All right. It only happens to me? Dang, well, it daggone happened to me again last night, so maybe you're right. Okay, so we're ready to go? So today we're going to talk about polity, how the church governs itself and how all that works, okay? There's a note in here to me to tell you to all write a letter to the bishop. This bishop doesn't ask you to do that, so you don't have to worry about that. The last bishop wanted you all to write a letter describing why you've made this decision to get received or confirmed, but this bishop doesn't do that, so you just get to talk to her at 9 o'clock on the day. Do you all know what date it is that she's here? It's April 14th. Okay, so it's the second Sunday after Easter. Maybe that'd be a good thing to tell you.
Excuse me, Steve, so we're supposed to be at 9 o'clock?
So, yes, at 9 o'clock that day, assuming that things go the way they have in the past, she will meet with all of you who are being received or confirmed. Okay? No, it's as a group. No, she won't make you do it one-on-one. So don't worry about that. So yes, you can have everybody else cover for you, so it's good. Yep, so it's April 14th, so that's the second Sunday of Easter. Okay? So that's when she's coming, and the baptisms will be on Easter Sunday at 10 o'clock. Good? All right? Okay. And the sheet is bouncing around somewhere. Somebody's working. Colin's working on the sheet. That's fine. Okay. All right, good. Let's start with the story of how the church began in America. We talked a little bit about this in the history class, but just to quickly go over that. So most of you know that the U.S. Constitution was put together in 1787, I believe is the date. Is that right? Yeah. And that happened in Philadelphia, of course. And approximately 1/2 of the people that were in the meeting setting up the U.S. Constitution walked down the street in Philadelphia to Christ Church, and they set up the government for the Episcopal Church in America. It's not the Episcopal Church in America anymore, but they set it up, and it was called the Protestant Episcopal Church in America. And now the Episcopal Church is part of many other countries too. So we are a worldwide church. I don't mean the Anglican Communion. I mean the Episcopal Church that started in America now has branches in many parts of South America, in Mexico, in the Philippines, and in Europe. There are many, not Anglican churches, but Episcopal churches in places in Europe. And in fact, one of my buddies is the rector of a church in Berlin. So we're, and I say that because in the old days, everybody called the church the national church. It's not a national church now, it's a worldwide church. And Catherine Jefferts Shorey, the presiding bishop before the last one, chastised me in public about saying the national church once. So I'll never forget again. So the church's actual name is the Episcopal Church. But anyway, so those, about half the folks that set up the U.S. government walked down the street to Christ Church and set up the church. So if a lot of this stuff sounds like the way the American government runs, that's because it's the same people who set it up. And they followed a very similar script, okay? And we talked about the preface in the book and where all that came from, okay? So we compare that as we go. All right, so let's start with what I think is probably the most important thing about the Episcopal Church compared to other churches, and even the rest of the Anglican Church. And if you go to page 855 in the prayer book, So in the middle there, it says the ministry. Does everybody have it? Okay. So the first question there, who are the ministers of the church? Somebody want to read that into the little microphone here? Thank you, Jennifer. Yep, that very first question. Yep,
Just the first question.
just the question. Yep, first question.
Who are the ministers of the church?
And the answer.
The ministers of the church are lay persons, bishops, priests, and deacons.
Okay, so this was a really conscious decision when we wrote this. The ministers of the church are first laypersons, and then come all those other mucky-muck people. First are laypersons, and that's really, really important to us. Lay people are the ministers. In the last church I was in, I actually had a thing on the front, on the inside cover of the bulletin that said, ministers of the church, everyone, all the people. So, because I think it's important for people to realize that, okay? Now, living into that is not quite as easy. We're still trying to envision how this works in many ways. But one of the historic things that I'd like to tell you about is Bishop Stuart Zabriskie in Nevada. And Stuart came up with this idea called total ministry. And the thought is that lay people could work in churches at a level much higher than had been happening before. And in Nevada, there are lots of rural churches that can't have a priest because it would be too difficult. They couldn't afford it, and it would be too difficult to get somebody there. So he came up with this idea of total ministry and what we later called local ordination. And people would get called up out of individual congregations, and they would be ordained to just serve that congregation. And local ordination still exists, but not in the same form that Stuart came up with it. But that's one of the things that's happened in the church to do that. That is going to be happening more and more in the church because there are, I think the average congregation in the Episcopal Church now, a number of people, average Sunday attendance is about 50. So as churches get smaller and churches are more disconnected from the whole group, and people can't afford to hire a full-time priest, this kind of thing is going to happen. But remember that lay people can do everything in the church except take part in the consecrating the elements and that kind of thing. And that's why lay people are a major part of everything that we do in the service. Okay? All right. So this is called Jennifer.
Can you explain why lay people can't participate in the consecration part?
Wow. Okay. You have to ask the big questions, don't you? Okay, so we talked a little bit about this a week or so ago. I can't remember which one. Because lay people are the heart of the church and are all ministers, and because I believe that nothing happens up here because I don't have magic hands, there's nothing different about my hands than anybody else's. That is why we've encouraged people to say the words of institution with the priest, because the whole point here is that this is something that happens when we are all together, and this only happens when we do it as a group. However, at the beginning of the church, the decision was made that particular things in the church needed to be done by particular people. And in the Bible, there are lists of people to do those things. A priest wasn't one of them at the time. So the decision was made very early in the church that consecration would be for those who are ordained in the tradition and have done this amount of training. And it stuck. And there are many people that are worried a bit about clericalism, about the idea that that priests have too much power in the church, and even though we say that lay people are involved. So that was a decision made in the 2nd century in the church. So, and it's just stuck. And I think that's changing a little bit, but not much, okay? So
how, what you were speaking about earlier about the shift as economics and
yep.
how is that going to affect what you just talked about?
So Stuart's idea, I'm sorry, I need to repeat the question, sorry. I just said I'm going to repeat the question. The question was, there were, what are we doing now in the church? How is this difference in what we're doing in the church with local ordination? How does that affect this whole picture? So to this point, people still need to be ordained to consecrate the elements, etc. So nothing has changed on that front. The middle ground was, Stuart's idea is that we would have another form of ordination for people who were just going to serve a specific congregation and no place else. And we called that a Canon 9 ordination. There was another canon written into the Constitution of the Church to ordain people just to serve a local congregation. That whole process is kind of on hold right now, and it's not really happening. So what is happening more right now is that one priest is serving multiple congregations. That's how the problem is mostly being addressed these days. We'll see how that goes. We'll just see how it goes. Okay? Episcopal. Okay, that's the name of the church. What does Episcopal mean? Anybody know what Episcopal means?
Doesn't the word come from bishop?
Yep. So, yes, Episcopal means of a bishop. Yeah, so that's where it comes from. If you look it up in the dictionary, it says any of various churches governed by bishops. That is totally wrong. We are not governed by bishops. Don't ever let somebody tell you that a bishop is governing us. That's not how we do things. Everything in this church has to be decided by lay people and ordained people together, okay? Bishops can represent us, they can make statements for us, but we are not governed by bishops, okay? That's really hard for people to understand because in every other tradition, that's the case. We're governed by a combination of lay, bishops, priests, and deacons, okay? So in that way, the Methodist Church is closer to Episcopal than we are because their bishops have authority to do many more things that can't be done by bishops in this denomination, okay? For example, Methodist bishops they assign clergy to go to certain churches. We don't do that. You all vote on who you want, okay? With the exception of a mission church where a bishop could appoint somebody. But for the most part, every church makes their own decision about who goes there. Okay. So that process to select a priest for a church is usually done the church usually has a search committee that helps find individuals to run for the position. And the search committee is, or the church in general, writes some sort of a profile to describe the church, and that profile is matched with profiles of individuals, and you try to come up with a match, and then you interview those people, and then you pick them. We do the same thing with our bishops. We select our bishops in the same way. The diocese has a search committee. They find people that match the profile of the diocese, and then they bring them in to interview, etc. Okay? All right. So if you look on that same page, 855, it describes the ministry of the laity, and then underneath that it describes the ministry of a bishop, which I think is interesting. The ministry of the bishop is to represent Christ and his church, particularly as apostle, chief priest, and pastor of a diocese. Bishops are involved in lots of administrative work, but that's not their primary function. The bishop is the chief pastor, not a hierarchical head, but who I represent, okay? So, I mean, at the beginning of the church, there were just bishops. And when we had so many churches that we couldn't do that anymore, then there were priests. So I represent the bishop in this place, okay? The bishop is given no authority in our church without being advised by the standing committee. So at the church level, we have a vestry that's elected by all of you, and we have a rector, and decisions are made together. The same thing is true for a bishop. There's a standing committee, and the standing committee makes decisions with the bishops, okay? The bishop has responsibility to admonish, suspend, or remove a priest or deacon, but only after approval of the standing committee. So, in theory, a bishop cannot come in here and say, okay, Keplinger, get the heck out of here, in theory. Now, sometimes that's a little push too, but the standing committee is supposed to be involved in that process, okay? If a clergy does something untoward or illegal or unethical, we have a whole thing in the Constitution written up about that. It's called Title IV. It was mostly written by a friend of mine, Steve Hutchinson, in the Diocese of Utah, and that has all the rules for what a priest can and can't do. But if somebody makes a complaint and a presentment against a clergy is made, that has to be done by the standing committee, not a bishop. So that's interesting too. Priests are representative of bishops in individual churches. So that's what we do. So we have two titles for priests in charge of a church, and they are rector and vicar. So I think most of you know that I'm a rector, and in some churches the priest in charge is called a vicar. So the vicar is the priest in charge of a congregation that is not supporting itself, that is getting help from the diocese financially or in some other way. So that person is called a vicar. A rector is the priest in charge of a congregation that is supporting itself. So the rector or the vicar has authority for and responsibility for the conduct of worship and the spiritual jurisdiction of the parish, as well as teaching, subject to the prayer book, the canons, and the pastoral direction of the bishop. So there you go. So in theory, I have responsibility for worship here. But I'll say to you right now that any priest who makes those decisions unilaterally is going to find themselves in trouble really, really quickly. And here at Grace St. Paul's, we have a liturgy committee, And I write up the service, I design the service, and then it goes to the liturgy committee to hack it up and tell me all the things I did wrong. Okay? But in theory, a priest in charge has responsibility for that, but just those things, okay? Everything else is done in combination. Before we get too far into that, let me say, oh, sorry. Debbie. Yep. Under Title IV. Under Title IV, go ahead. Uh-huh. Yes. So the question was, is there, under Title IV, is there a right of appeal in that process? There absolutely is. And so the presentment is made, and it goes to the standing committee and the bishop, and an investigation is done by a private firm as well as somebody inside the church. And then the presentment comes, and the person comes to the bishop and the standing committee, and then they get an opportunity to defend themselves. Okay? I will tell you all, gosh, I guess I'm telling the whole world, but I've been called up on Title IV twice since I've been at Grace St. Paul's. Only twice. Well, thanks a lot, Debbie. Well, I know, but that kind of stuff, that's not Title IV. Title IV is unethical, immoral stuff, okay? So I've been called on it twice, and it never got to neither of them got to the presentment category. In both cases, they did the investigation. The bishop called me in, and the bishop said, here's what we found out, so we're just not going to pursue this anymore because there's nothing there. It's creepy stuff. But the other side of this is there are churches that don't do this, who I will not name right now, and that's why they are in so much trouble right now. So a process, I think, is really, really important. So it's there. And I can tell you that I've been through it twice, and it worked both times, at least for me. So, but it's pretty creepy. Okay? Okay, deacons. We didn't talk about deacons. So on page 856 is the deacon description. If somebody wants to read that, that would be great. See it there? Second question. You don't need to. The ministry of a deacon is to represent Christ and his church, particularly as a servant of those in need, and to assist bishops and priests in the proclamation of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments. So deacons do not consecrate elements. Deacons' number one job is to serve us and serve the world, mostly the world. So all of our deacons here, they all have things that they do in the world to serve people in different ways. Each of them has a different thing. As you all know, we bring the world here a lot in our food pantry and our social service ministry, but all of them have a specific ministry that they're involved in to serve other people. I will tell you that I thought that I was called to be a deacon when I started my process and in the Diocese of Utah. And I got to the very end of that process before postulancy, like Dale just became a postulant. We'll talk about those words in a second. And I got to the end and they said, we're going to approve you, but we think you're hearing your call incorrectly. We believe that you're supposed to be a priest. And I will always be eternally grateful to those folks for seeing what I could not see. So, anyway, good. Lisa?
I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this, but I feel compelled to. And that is when you talk about consecration, the process. But it was
Yeah, so the question is about consecration of the elements. Is that what you specifically? So the Eucharistic prayer that we do each week is the consecration of the elements, and there are 5 parts that's necessary in any Eucharistic prayer, and consecration is one of those parts. The other ones are remembering, anamnesis, oblation, thanksgiving, and doxology. So the consecration is that entire prayer. There have been many people over the centuries that have talked about the specific words, this is my body, this is my blood, and that this is the magic part, and this is where the magic happens, and you ring the bells, and everything zaps right at that moment. We don't believe that in this tradition. That whole Eucharistic prayer is one act together of consecration and all of that. And as I just said, I don't think anything happens unless everyone here is involved in that process of that happening. Okay? Good? All right. Okay. Let me also say that deacons report to the bishop. So this is very strange in our church. So the deacons that work here, they report to the bishop. They don't report to me. The associate priests report to me, but they don't. They report to the bishop. So the bishop gets to make every call about that. So that's just an interesting little side note, okay? Who has the sheet, the sign-up sheet thingy? Is there a pen with it? Is there a pen with it? Is there a pen? Is there? Yes. Okay. Okay. That's fine. I just couldn't figure out where my pen was. Okay. Yep. You're good. You're good. Okay. So deacons report to the bishop, which is kind of interesting in some weird cases, but that's how it works. And in fact, we had a woman in church today who was visiting us for the first time, who lives in Seattle and is moving here, and she's an ordained deacon, and she was talking about whether she might be called to this parish. So she had a conversation with the bishop on Friday about that, and we'll see what happens as a result of that. But I can't say, yes, I mean, I could ask the bishop, but I don't get to make a decision about that. That's the bishop's decision, okay? All right. Let's talk about, I keep thinking of other things we should talk about. Let's talk about deacons, the kinds of deacons we have. In our denomination, we ordain people in a hierarchy. I'm going to just say it. We ordain people a deacon, and then if they're going to be a priest, we ordain them a priest, and then if they get elected bishop, they would get ordained a bishop. It's a 3-tier thing. So some deacons are transitional deacons, and that means that they are only going to be a deacon for a short period of time before they become a priest. And and a lot of people argue that this is important for all priests to learn how to be servants before they go anywhere else, and I sure wouldn't argue with that one bit. But I personally, this is me speaking now, I personally tend to think that this whole idea of ordaining somebody in that pattern suggests a hierarchy, which is not what this church is at all. So some of us are arguing that we should stop having transitional deacons, that somebody should get ordained a deacon or get ordained a priest, and you're finished. That has actually come to the floor of General Convention a couple times, but it's never made it to the point of voting yet. So, but for right now, we have transitional deacons and permanent deacons, okay? All right, so for example, Edwin Andrade, who a lot of you know, who is presently working at a Lutheran church in Chicago, is a postulant here. I haven't done those words yet. I'll do those in a second. And he will be ordained a transitional deacon before he gets ordained a priest. You have to be a transitional deacon for at least 6 months before you can become a priest, as things stand right now. Go ahead, Jennifer.
You answered one of my questions, but I'm wondering about which positions are paid positions.
Boy, that's something I didn't think about telling you. That's great, thank you. It's different. It's different in the church. In this diocese, no deacons are paid, with the possible exception of the archdeacon, the deacon that sets up things for all the other deacons. So all deacons are unpaid in this diocese. That is not true across the board in the Episcopal Church. There are some deacons that are paid. Most of the time, it's just a stipend of some sort. And actually, in reality, they're paid here, but they're paid just a tiny, tiny little bit of money so that the government puts them on a retirement plan. So here, deacons are not paid, and some priests are, and some priests aren't, depending on the circumstances. Okay. We have a lot of retired priests here that help us out, like Father Larry Weeks did a couple weeks ago, and some others, okay? And Alan Breckenridge. Yep, go ahead, Jennifer.
I might be getting ahead of things, but can you explain what a diocese is and how the region's determined?
Yep, I'll get there. Yep. I'm gonna start with the parish, and then we'll go to the diocese, okay? But those terms for ordination, I keep skipping over that. So when someone thinks that maybe they're called to an ordained ministry, and they go to the church and say, I think I might be called to this, they immediately become an aspirant, is the word. And an aspirant is somebody who's thinking about this process. And then they'll start meeting with people and building that process. When that person has been approved by the diocese, and that's done by another committee called the Commission on Ministry. When that person is approved by the Commission on Ministry and the bishop, again, lay people and bishop together, when they both approve him, the person becomes a postulant. In theory, once you become a postulant, then nothing except if you do something against Title IV would take you out of the process, in theory. I tell you that it doesn't always work that way, but that's the way it's supposed to work. So once you reach postulancy, you should get ordained, unless something happens, okay? So that's why it was so important when you heard last week that Dale Ann is a postulant now. So in theory, she will, there's nothing that should stop her from becoming an ordained person, okay? All right, good. Okay, so yeah, aspirant, postulant, candidate is the next category. Candidate is when you're very near the end of this process, and I'll tell you what happens once you're a candidate. You get all the psychological tests and all of that done all over again that you got at the beginning of the process to see how crazy you became during the process. So assuming that you're not too crazy, then once you're a candidate, the next thing is you get ordained, okay? Good? All right, I'm sorry for being so pejorative with this language, but I'm trying to make this a little fun too. Okay, parish church level, okay? So church membership is defined by baptism, okay? That's how we decide that somebody is in the church. And the church's role is to welcome and nurture, not to create barriers. I love to say that out loud. That's not the church's job. It's supposed to be the opposite, okay? In this tradition, we have baptized members, and then we have something called communicants in good standing. So for you to vote at our elections and stuff, you need to be a communicant in good standing. And the definition for that, which got very screwed up during COVID, the definition is that you go to communion at least 3 times a year and that you are a, quote, giver of record, unquote. Okay? So you have to give something. It doesn't necessarily mean financial, but you have to be a giver, and it has to be on record. Okay? So those are our categories: communicant in good standing, baptized member. All right? The actual governing of each church is left up to diocese, but typically there is an annual meeting. We elect a vestry. The vestry takes responsibility for the finances and the property of the church. We go much further than that here at Grace St. Paul's. We have a senior warden and a junior warden, okay? So those are the categories in a church. So annual meeting, you vote for all this stuff, you elect a vestry. The vestry is who represents you, all right? Typically once a month meeting, etc. Senior warden. So senior warden is the only position in the church that the priest in charge gets to decide themselves. So you don't get to vote on the senior warden. I get to pick the senior warden. And the senior warden is supposed to be the priest in charge's right-hand person. Okay? So I try to pick people who I know understand me and how weird I am, and that they can relate to all of that and help me figure out things that I can't figure out, or see things that as a priest I would never see in the church. And you all know there are plenty of things that happen in the church that you would never tell me, but maybe the senior warden could help with that, okay? The junior warden is the people's warden, the warden for all of you. So you do elect the junior warden, and the junior warden's main job is the property of the church, to make sure that the physical plant is in good order, okay? All right, and you elect that person. Episcopal parishes functions in the same way a congregational church does, but with some diocesan framework. The canons very deftly split responsibility between the rector and the vestry. So the vestry is in charge of some things, the rector is in charge of some things. I already told you a few of them: worship and the building and that kind of thing. But the whole idea is that we're working together in all of those things. But if push comes to shove, the vestry is in charge of some things, the rector the others. And basically, vestry is finances and property, priest is teaching and worship, okay? But of course, we're supposed to work together. We talked about the canons of the church, I think, a few weeks ago. And I talked about the fact that the canons in the Roman Catholic Church would take up this whole row, books this thick, maybe 50 of them taking up. Our entire canons are this thick. I should have brought them with me, but I don't have them. So it's a much different understanding of how to do things than in some churches. This is me speaking. Whenever somebody says, well, what do we really have to do here? What does it say in the canons? I know we're already in trouble. If somebody's saying, is at the point where they have to look something up in the canons to see whose job it is, we're in trouble already. And our canons address those things, but we don't ever want to get to that place, okay? The rector does get to pick assistant clergy in this diocese, so I can make that decision alone, and I do interview people alone, but I think you all know me that I would never make that decision by myself, so I bring other people into that process. But legally, I could do that, okay? Vestries are agents and legal representatives of a parish in all matters concerning the corporate property and the relations to its clergy. But control of the church and the parish buildings are assigned to the rector or the vicar. So you see what the church is trying to do. We're just trying to create a balance there so that both have to be involved in everything, okay? Yep. Both.
So if someone were to sue the church, then the vestry would be a part of that?
So the question is, if someone sues the church, would a vestry be a part of that? Yes, they are the legal representatives of the church. So, yeah, if somebody sues the church, it's just not just me they're suing. Yeah. They have to be involved. Now, we have a chancellor here at Grace St. Paul's, and many churches do. Most of you know him, Rob Rao, who was a retired attorney. And the only time we got sued since I've been here was about a case that occurred 50 years ago, and Rob helped us with that. But it's the vestry that has to make the final decisions about that, yes. Absolutely, okay? All right. A majority vote of the vestry can petition for help in resolving a dispute. So if something's going bad in the church, the vestry can just vote and have a majority and have somebody come in from the diocese to try to help. A vestry cannot remove a vicar or a rector in this diocese without the bishop's consent. So that's part of the process too, to keep that balance thing. We assume that the members of a parish know what is best for their community, so we try to make them make those decisions. Okay? All right. Okay, good. That's how the parish works. Good.
And talk about the communication between you and the vestry.
Talk about the communication between me and the vestry. There isn't any. I'm just kidding. We have a really good relationship. So we have a once a month meeting. The vestry and I meet together. I'm on the vestry, so we serve together, and we make every single decision together. By the way, you are all invited to vestry meetings. They're presently on Zoom, but you all can come to any vestry meeting you want, either in person or on Zoom, to see what's going on. There are very occasional times when we have to go into executive session to talk about something that can't be public knowledge, but for the most part, anybody can go to any vestry meeting. So I don't know what you mean. We talk about everything and we make every decision together. So anything that comes up, I call in the vestry, and I usually do that by talking to our senior warden first, who is Steve Maddox right now, and say, Steve, what are we going to do about this? And then we just take it to the vestry to vote on it. Okay? Yep. All right. Okay. So that's the parish level. At the diocesan level, as Jennifer was asking about, the setup is very much the same. We have an annual convention, and you all know about that. In this diocese, it happens in October, and we elect people to go to annual convention and represent us. And we have 5 delegates to annual convention. And again, we have lay delegates and clergy delegates, and just like we do at the church level. And every decision that we vote on at the diocese has to be voted on, by both of them. On some decisions, we vote by orders, meaning that we have to have over 50% in both the clergy and the lay people to pass something. Other things, we just have to get a vote together, okay, and make that decision, all right? The standing committee is like the vestry in a church, and the standing committee is also elected, and the standing committee is, again, half clergy and half lay people. And they adopt the budget and the program, and they work hand in hand with the bishop. In some dioceses, there's also what's called a diocesan council, and that makes decisions with the standing committee. There used to be a diocesan council in this diocese, and we killed it a couple years ago. So anyway, but it's just another board to help make decisions. We talked a little bit about a bishop selection. There's a nominating committee. Lay people are elected to serve as delegates. And then when we vote for a bishop, we always vote in houses, lay and clergy. So the years when you're electing a bishop, it's very cool to be somebody who goes to diocesan convention, a delegate, because you get to vote on the next bishop. And we just split up. All the clergy sit on one side of this giant building, and all the lay people sit on the other side, and we vote. And the person has to get over 50% of the vote in both houses to get elected. So most of the time, electing a bishop takes multiple ballots. Sometimes, there's 7, 8, 9, 10 ballots before you elect somebody. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and you have to sleep on it and come back the next day. The elections I've done, the longest was 5 ballots, and that was Bishop Carolyn Tanner Irish in Utah. And anyway, it's very fun, but that's how it happens, okay? All right, everything's voted on. I'll throw you out some bishop terms. We have something called a suffragan bishop. We love these words in the Episcopal Church. A suffragan bishop, and a suffragan bishop is an assisting bishop. So like in very large dioceses, a bishop could not possibly do this all by themselves. So for example, in the Diocese of LA, there's, 400 churches. There's no way a single bishop could get to all those churches, so that we have suffragans to do that with them. And the other term you'll hear is coadjutor. And a coadjutor is a bishop that is serving with another bishop. They're learning how to be a bishop. So they spend a time where you have the bishop that's outgoing and the bishop that's coming in, and they serve together so that the coadjutor can learn. Okay? Good? All right. The national church. Oh, see, I did it again. The Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church overall. All right? So we have a very similar setup at that level. No bishop can be consecrated without 3 other bishops consecrating them, and that's to ensure that the diocese has the approval of the larger church. This has become an issue in recent years. For example, the Diocese of South Carolina tried to elect a bishop who was going to take the diocese out of the Episcopal Church, and that didn't happen. Today, the election of a bishop in America must also have the approval of the majority of the diocese. So that's how we were more careful about that. There are 114 dioceses. I think I've got them all. 114 dioceses in the Episcopal Church right now. So some of them that you might not think about, Navajo land is its own diocese. Europe, El Salvador, Ecuador, Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Honduras, Puerto Rico, and I mentioned Europe. So all of those are dioceses, and then we have, of course, all the dioceses in the United States, okay? So just as the diocese is bishop and the standing committee and or a diocesan council, in the Episcopal Church, gosh, I'm still doing it. We have the presiding bishop and an executive council, and that executive council is elected at General Convention, which we hold every 3 years, okay? So General Convention every 3 years, that's the whole church, everybody together. We have a presiding bishop. Who's our presiding bishop now? Our presiding bishop, the whole church. The whole big church. Your buddy. Michael Curry, right, okay. So the presiding bishop serves a 9-year term, and they're elected at General Convention, and that's also very cool, okay? And again, the presiding bishop can make statements for us, but the presiding bishop cannot tell you what to think or believe, okay? We have to vote on all of that, okay? So that's very cool. General Convention meets in 2 houses, the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. Right now, all of the bishops in the church can go to the House of Bishops. There is a movement in the church to not have retired bishops be allowed to come. And that's because some people think the retired bishops are holding us back from making progressive changes in the church. So there's a movement. So far, that has not been passed, but it comes up often, okay? And the House of Deputies, each diocese is represented by 4 lay deputies and 4 clerical deputies, and they're elected at convention, okay? So you see this, House of Bishops, House of Deputies. One of them, you have a standard number of people that's elected. The other one, it's a whole bunch of people. Does that sound familiar? It's just like the House of Representatives and the Senate, okay? That's where the idea came from, all right? General Convention votes on things like budget, choosing the Executive Council, adopting resolutions. We have so many resolutions. Prayer book revisions, and hymnal revisions. And that is how we change theology and liturgy in the church. We vote on it. Everybody gets together and we vote. That's how we make changes. The presiding bishop is the chief pastor, and the CEO speaks God's words to the church and the world, visits every diocese. There you go, okay? We have 9 provinces in the Episcopal Church, and that is just sections of the country that break down because it's too unwieldy sometimes to have the entire Episcopal Church to make decisions. So we break things down into provinces sometimes too, okay? All right. Okay, so that's the Episcopal Church, and then comes the Anglican Communion. The Anglican Communion is the entire Anglican Church that began in England. It started in England and then went here and to Australia and to New Zealand. And then came, remember we talked about this in the history part, and then came all of the American missions to China and Japan and Africa and South America and all of those places. So the hierarchical head of the Anglican Church is the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I'm sure you all know the Archbishop of Canterbury or have heard that term. But there other churches within the Anglican Communion are not part of the Episcopal Church in the way we govern ourselves, okay? So they all do that different ways, and we're bound together by a common heritage and a common understanding of faith and worship, okay? That's it. The Archbishop of Canterbury can't make decisions for us, can't tell us what to believe, and as you all know, there is a fairly strong rift right now between what's happening in the Episcopal Church and our accepting of LGBTQ plus people, and that is not happening in the whole church. England's come along much slower with regards to women's ordination and that kind of thing, but they're getting there. We don't have to agree on any of that, okay?
Steve, I think that because the word Anglican is used by others, we have to sort of make that clear.
Thanks for bringing that up,
Thanks.
Bruce. Thanks for bringing that up. So, unfortunately, the word Anglican is supposed to refer to the entire church in the whole world. But unfortunately, what happened here in America is that churches who were not on board with where the Episcopal Church is on the issues that I just brought up, some of them have decided to leave the Episcopal Church. And when they did, most of them called themselves Anglican churches because they connected with a church somewhere else. And in most of those cases, they connected with a church in Africa, because Africa is probably the most conservative group of churches within the Anglican Communion. And you can imagine why, but I'm going to say this is me speaking now. We reap what we sow here. For when we had all those missions to Africa, we gave them our 150-year-old theology books and liturgy books, and then we wondered why they were coming back to us with these understandings that we had moved way past. Well, gee, I wonder how that happened. So I don't want to get off on a tangent there, but you understand what I'm saying. And Bruce's point is really well taken. So if you see a church in America called an Anglican church, almost assuredly that's a breakaway church, a church that left the Episcopal Church because of our rules, especially in those areas. Okay? Okay.
There's the Church of England,
Right?
then there's Anglican, and then there's Episcopal.
No. So Anglican is the big term. So the question was, how does Church of England and Anglican and Episcopal go together? So Anglican is the general term for the whole church in the whole world, okay? We're all Anglican churches. Bruce has been bringing up the fact that people that have left the Episcopal Church are calling themselves Anglican, because they are. They've affiliated themselves with a church in Africa and saying that this African bishop is their bishop instead of where they are here.
So here's my disconnect. So is the church in Africa Anglican?
Yes. Yeah, so the churches in... Yeah, and we're all Anglican churches. We are an Anglican church too. But that term has been used pejoratively in recent years to differentiate them from the Episcopal Church.
I think they like your confusion.
I think where Bruce is going is exactly right. That's what they want. These churches that have broken away, they're not part of the Episcopal Church, but they're saying that they're part of the worldwide Anglican Communion, and I guess you could say that they are, but really, you've affiliated yourself with an African church, and that makes you Anglican? I don't know. But you get it? So the Anglican Church is the whole thing. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the figurative head, the senior member of the family, as we refer to him, okay? And that's how it breaks down. Is that good? Okay. So at that level, at the Anglican Church level, every 10 years, the Archbishop of Canterbury invites all the bishops in the whole Anglican Church to come together. The first one was in 1867. There were 87 bishops at that one. 1998 was the first year we had women there, believe it or not. It was as late as 1998. And in today's church, so the most Anglicans in the world now are in Africa. We are big time a church of color when you look at it that way, because there are more Africans in the Anglican Church than any other group of people, okay? Which is kind of interesting, okay? Did somebody good? So we do not have an international structure in the church except for those meetings the Lambeth Conference, and another group, the Anglican Consultative Council is the group that meets for all the churches in the whole world. But all of the resolutions that come out of those groups, the Anglican Consultative Council and Lambeth Conference, all of the bishops, are non-binding. Because, of course, the meeting at Lambeth is just bishops. They don't get to say things for us. I mean, they can make a statement as the bishops in the church, but they can't tell us what to believe or do, all right? Very, very different than most churches. So the statements that come out of Lambeth, they're lovely and they're interesting, but they're just their opinions, okay? All right. So each national church or Episcopal church is, in our case, remains free to make our own decisions about what we're doing, okay? So we're basically an international church without a governing body. I mean, that's how this comes down, okay? And that's what we want. We want the church to be a living body, not a bureaucracy. So, very, very different than most church structures. All right? What are your questions? Look, Kaya gave me a shirt. All right, what did we not cover? What do you want to? Oh, you're coming to the microphone? Is that where you're going? You're sure taking a roundabout way to get there. Okay.
So with all of these elections of various folks in different positions, like yours, like the bishop, et cetera, especially with the bishop, although I'm sure you deal with this all the time too, and that is administrative demands. But then when choosing, like a bishop, it seems to me that part of the choice, besides excellent administrative abilities, is also about spirituality.
Well, I would hope.
And so how to judge that, to vote on these individuals? You know, I mean, hey, I know Jane Doe and she did good deeds and blah, blah, and I like her.
Right.
Or
Right.
is there something more substantial? How do we get there?
So that process at each level is basically the same. And so it's up to the nominating committee and the search committee to come up with a group of people that they believe meets the criteria for that diocese. So it's really, really important to start that process with a profile of the diocese and what the diocese is all about. Judging spiritualness is not an easy task, as you know, and it's a different thing to different people. When you go through that initial matchup process, where you do a profile and potential bishops write their own profile, there is an electronic matching system to try to match people up in that part of the process. But what it comes down to is when you get, usually there are 3 people chosen to run at the final level, and that was also the case here at Grace St. Paul's. There were 3 people when I got this job. There were 3 people that were nominated, and then it went to the whole church. And then those people go to each individual church in the diocese or a group of churches in the diocese, and everybody in those churches gets to ask all of those questions, and then they give feedback to the committee, and they give feedback to the people voting, and then you just vote on it. So there's a lot of criteria to make that decision, and that profile was supposed to set up the standards for what's most important for you in that diocese. Okay? West?
So I was a little curious because you mentioned the Diocese of El Salvador, and I know a lot about El Salvador since my dad's from there. But I was curious because about like how do like churches that are outside of the U.S. Like give their opinion in how the church is run, because it's so important that everybody gives their opinion in this church. And also, I was wondering if you know like if you have any idea of like what it's like for churches outside of the U.S. I was about to say El Salvador.
Yeah.
Because my impression is that the Episcopal Church is very welcoming and accepting, and in a lot of countries like El Salvador, it's really dangerous for those churches to maybe be more open and accepting. So I was just wondering about that. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yep. So the first part again was,
How do they give their opinions? And like
how do they give their opinions? Okay. So that happens at General Convention. So every 3 years, everybody comes together. This next one is going to be in Phoenix, actually, in the summer. The hotel rates will be cheap. So anyway, all of those. So each church nominates delegates, and then the delegates go to their diocesan conventions, and they vote on deputies to go to General Convention. So every diocese in the church, all 114 of those dioceses, send 4 lay people and 4 clergy to vote at General Convention, which happens every 3 years. And everybody's there, all those churches all over. So Europe has one convocation. So for all of Europe, they have 4 lay deputies and 4 clergy. And because there's just a small number of churches within that. So they vote like everybody else. So they have the same voting power as everybody else in the church. As far as how the Episcopal Church in America is different than other places and what happens if you're in El Salvador or Honduras, we do our best here to support all of those churches and to create a place where it's going to be as safe as it can be. We have a lot of sister diocese things where we set up to help groups like that when they're struggling. The other thing is a lot of those folks, like a lot of our dioceses in Mexico, are dirt poor. So we have sister dioceses to help them. So we have that kind of familial relationship with the Diocese of Mexico here in Arizona, and we help them financially and try to help them with other stuff. Good question. Jennifer?
Let's see if I can formulate my question.
Okay.
I'm thinking about how careful you are not to say National Episcopal Church.
Yeah, I did really great with that, didn't I?
Well, but you've made the point.
Yeah.
And thinking about the governance system, what does that mean in terms of at what level people can take social justice stands? So like you went to Washington, D.C., who were you representing? Do you know what I'm saying? In terms of like situations around climate justice or migrant justice or whatever, can the Episcopalian community of the United States take a stance and do some action at a bigger level?
Yes.
Or does it have to be?
No, it can happen at any of those levels. So an individual church can do it, like we did. A diocese can take a stance separate from the rest of the Episcopal Church, and the Episcopal Church in America can do the same thing. So our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, could go to all of, now he can't do it by himself, but he could go to the committee and say, so I think we need to take a stand on this in the whole world. So we need to make a statement on Gaza or whatever, and he did. So the Episcopal Church came out and called for a ceasefire in Gaza, and we did that as the entire Episcopal Church. And
So how does it get to that level? Do you know, does it have, what procedures does it have to go through for him to make that kind of stance?
No, these are really good questions. So General Convention is set up for all of those big decisions. So anything that comes up like that gets filtered into the General Convention box, and then we vote on it. So for example, we have a committee on liturgy and music. So somebody goes to the committee and says, we got to get rid of this prayer, this is terrible, and we need to do this, and it puts in, and we vote at that at General Convention. If we're going to make statements in the world, though, we need a mechanism to make that happen faster. So anybody can contact the Episcopal Church and say, I think we need to do this. And of course, the more people that do that, the better. And this is interesting because you've seen this discussion around Oak Flat, right? So, and those questions that Carol Rose was asking about, well, they're not easily answered. And that's why some of us were not giving straight answers to her. But any group of people could go to the Episcopal Church level and say, we think we need to make a stand on this. And the more people that you have, the better your chance are for that to happen. So that's how Michael Curry came out and said something about Gaza. And we could make a decision at that level about Oak Flat or anything else.
So just curious about like the example in particular of Gaza, because it's like an emergent
Right.
situation
Right.
that's very crisis, which climate crisis is, frankly. But, you know, how did it get fast-tracked, or how does that, like, I'm just curious.
So the hope is that the presiding bishop, as leader of the church, will bring those things up. Will say, I think we need to do this, and bring it to the floor of those committees right away and make a decision. That's the fastest way for it to happen. It's much more difficult to do it at the grassroots. That said, the way things change in the body of this church is almost always grassroots. It almost always happens from an individual church. And the example I've already given you is here at Grace St. Paul's. I mean, we've done the season of creation now since I've been here, and I did it a few years before I got here, and now it's in the Book of Occasional Services. And that was because we took it to General Convention and said, we think this needs to happen for the whole church. It's a little unwieldy, and because we have all this structure in the church, it is sometimes difficult to get things through, but it's way faster than any other hierarchical church that I know of. I mean, 20 years to make a change like that in church life is really, really fast. It's not fast enough, I get that, but it's pretty darn fast. Lisa?
Where is Bishop Curry's statement about Gaza? I missed it.
The question was, where is Bishop Curry's statement about Gaza? If you go to the TEC website, it'll be on there. They've made statements, but no, yes. Yes, there's been multiple statements made on assault weapons, yes. just thought of something else as you were saying that, but I lost it. It's gone. What else? Good? All right, are you guys okay with having this on Palm Sunday, next Sunday? With having the last class? It'll be a little bit longer day, but I still think we can start at noon if you're good with that. Because that would be the last class. So next week is basically a comparison of denominations in the present day world, because it's not like it was even 5 years ago. So we'll compare denominations, and then we'll have a little discussion about whether we are moving towards a post-denominational age, and that kind of discussion. Good. Thank you all. Thank you. Yep.
This is a question for between now and next year when you do this.
Okay. I'm going to turn this off.
Okay.